There is no lack of intent or will on the part of the manufacturing businesses to do more, but this is often constrained by challenges we face, and many of these challenges are not new. From issues such as access to finance at reasonable interest rates, reliable supply and cost of electricity, to high freight costs and market access. And while time will not permit me to elaborate on these challenges, as an association that is committed to the growth of this sector, we also share in the responsibility of bringing ideas and solutions to these challenges. It is in this regard that last year we presented to government a paper titled Boosting and Sustaining the Manufacturing Sector, which proposed approaches to addressing some of these challenges. Minister, we certainly look forward to discussing this with you. Recently, we have heard of government's intention to move our country from being a primary producer to one where we can add value across the productive sectors, whether agriculture, forestry, or mining. However, several recent measures have not been helpful in this regard. Tax measures introduced in Budget 2017, such as the recategorizing of zero and standard rated items to exempt, VAT on electricity and on forest products, among other measures, have impacted negatively on the manufacturing sector, leading to increases in prices and reducing cash flow in some instances. These measures have worked against the competitiveness of local manufacturers in both the domestic and overseas markets. We've also seen instances where Guyanese manufacturers of quarry materials, pharmaceuticals, and agro-produce have been replaced by import sourcing in public procurement. Such measures, coupled with decreasing domestic demand and imported substitutes, in the case of the wood processing sector in particular, have been unhelpful to value adding and encouraging the manufacturing sector. Added to this, early in the year, the GMSA had cause to make a public appeal regarding the exchange rate depreciation and the availability of foreign currency at commercial banks. However, we do recognize that government did take notice, and interventions have led to the stabilizing of the foreign currency situation. Nevertheless, concerns still remain whether this could reoccur along with depreciation, considering the downturn in performance of key foreign exchange earning sectors, such as bauxite and sugar, and the possibility of a rise in fuel prices globally. We would certainly welcome assurances that there is a menu of measures to maintain stability. Minister, you have publicly stated your intention to revisit several tax measures introduced in Budget 2017. And to support your efforts, earlier this week, the GMSA and the Forest Producers Association provided a position paper outlining the effects of the introduction of VAT on forest products. We hope that this can help influence your consideration to remove this tax. The GMSA over the years has made pronouncements on government's policies, programs, and plans, as well as on issues which we consider important to economic development and to the manufacturing and services sector. We have taken note of the developments regarding oil and gas, and like the rest of the private sector, and indeed the entire country, the GMSA is also excited at the prospects this will bring. However, our enthusiasm is also tempered when we look at the experiences from other developing countries with oil economies, including those nearby, where sole focus on oil and gas can often lead to disproportionate impacts on the other productive sectors, including manufacturing. Considering the rapid timeline from discovery to production, and the fact that the right enabling environment for this new sector needs to be put in place, there are concerns regarding opportunities for local businesses to provide goods and services, both now and in the future, and the mechanisms to facilitate this. It is important that we get this right from the inception, not at the expense of production timelines, but to ensure that Guyanese businesses are provided with an equal opportunity to be part of this new sector. We recognize that we are at the beginner stage of the learning curve. Our businesses may not have the full skill set, the experience, the certifications, etc. But we are willing to learn, we are willing to build capacity, and to partner with more experienced entities from the region and elsewhere. The GMSA has taken note of Exxon's initiative to establish an enterprise center which would provide training and skills development to small and medium-scale businesses to meet the needs of the oil and gas sector. Currently, operators and subcontractors are engaging with local companies, and expressions of interest are being put out for the provision of goods and services. Also, a local content policy has been drafted by government and is being reviewed. The GMSA welcomes these initiatives. However, we would like to see more information being readily available to businesses and a coordinated effort between operators, government, and the private sector. It is quite evident that oil and gas will play an important role in our economy. We have also heard very clearly government's intention to pursue a green economy. Guyana's commitments under the Paris Agreement have set ambitious targets for renewable energy and the conservation and management of forests. Guyana has launched the Green State Development Strategy Framework and expressed a commitment to the Norway Partnership. The GMSA welcomes this, and we look forward to information on specific opportunities for the private sector to get involved. In this regard, I want to state that the private sector is committed to playing its part in supporting a green economy. We are fully behind the Greening of Businesses initiative and would like to see the development and expansion of new green economic sectors, such as information technology and business process outsourcing. Minister, it is against this background of challenges, as well as opportunities, that your presentation here this evening is so critical. In offering your views on the future of the economy, we hope that you will be able to share with us government's perspectives on several critical issues. And these include government's policy position as it regards the manufacturing and services sector, and an indication of the wider economic plan encompassing other productive and export sectors. The enabling environment, including measures, tax reforms, and incentives to encourage private investments. The role you see the oil and gas industry playing in Guyana's future, and reconciling oil and gas with green development. And finally, your thoughts on strengthening public-private sector dialogue and cooperation. In closing, I want to emphasize that the GMSA and the private sector by extension is committed to playing our part in the development of Guyana. We remain open to working with government to address the challenges we face and to help put in place the enabling environment through which the private sector can realize its role as the engine of growth. Minister, we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
You know, it was a few weeks ago in a conversation with our diaspora at our embassy in Washington, D.C., USA. I called for, quote, a new breed of private sector individuals, end of quote. I went on to explain that my new breed will be at the heart of innovation, will be using cutting-edge technology, and will be joining forces with regional and other bodies to overcome deficits of financing and human resources, among others. This statement apparently generated a lot of angst among the top echelons of the Private Sector Commission, whose reaction was swift as it was negative. Mr. Chairman, what I implied in that statement is that I would like to see the emergence of people like Sham, whose achievements in the business environment, blended with his youth and vibrancy, holds much promise for both advancing and transforming business organizations. In the immortal words of Robert Kennedy, former Attorney General of the United States of America, quote, "This world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease." Sham, I hope your tenure will be marked by, quote, a quality of imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, end of quote. Along with agriculture, the manufacturing and services sectors are important elements in any country's economy. Undoubtedly, they make direct and significant contributions to gross domestic product and job creation, and provide crucial inputs for the rest of the economy, thus having a significant effect on the investment of a country. Let me reiterate that it's certainly this government's intention to continue to take steps to create a climate for business that is conducive to creating robust and sustainable manufacturing and service industries. Growing the share of manufacturing and services as contributors to the national pie remains a priority of our government as we aim to deliver a more diversified and green economy. Perhaps this is an opportune time to pause and reflect on our economy and the place of manufacturing in that performance. And in doing so, I want to assure you that I am not ignoring the importance of services. Indeed, that sector represents the largest share of our GDP, overtaking agriculture and industry. However, I think we all recognize the key role manufacturing plays in the development of a country. According to the 2016 publication of ECLAC, titled Latin America and the Caribbean in the World Economy, the region amid the tensions of globalization, quote, "For all the progress of the service economy and the digital economy in particular, the manufacturing sector has remained a major source of global economic dynamism. This is reflected in its high share of productivity growth and global exports, far outstripping its impact on value added and employment." So there you have the case for manufacturing. Now, a cursory examination of Guyana's economy will show that it has grown consistently in real terms over the last decade, largely due to favorable commodity prices and debt relief. Between 2006 and 2016, real economic growth averaged 4.3% per year. But as you know already, Guyana is a commodity-dependent exporter. So, consistent with that description, our economy's growth over the last decade, indeed since independence, has been driven by one or two primary products: bauxite, sugar, and more recently gold. In fact, 6 primary commodities, gold, bauxite, rice, sugar, timber, and fish, contribute in excess of 80% of total exports. While the economy was growing at this creditable rate, that is at 4.3% over the last decade, manufacturing's contribution stagnated for most of that period. Growth in the manufacturing sector, growth in the manufacturing services sector averaged 2.8% and 5.1% respectively over the past decade. The share of manufacturing averaged 7% between 2012 and 2016, increasing incrementally between 2012 and 2015 before falling to 6.5% in 2016. The same trend was observed when sugar processing and rice milling were excluded from manufacturing. Here, other manufacturing, which contributed 3.9% to GDP in 2012, increased to 4% by 2015, before returning to 3.9% of GDP in 2016. This dismal showing is expected to continue in 2017, when manufacturing is projected to be 6.6% of GDP, of which other manufacturing is estimated to be 3.8% of GDP. On the strength of these statistics, manufacturing's share of GDP will remain constant at 6.6% of GDP in 2017, 5 years after it would have achieved the same share in 2012, while other manufacturing would have regressed over the same period from 3.9% of GDP in 2012 to 3.8% of GDP in 2017. Continuing with the state of the economy, we have seen growth taking place in the context of low inflation, while the public debt has been maintained within sustainable levels. At the end of 2016, it was approximately 46.3% of GDP. In spite of positive economic performance, sustainable broad-based growth remains elusive. Our economy remains vulnerable to terms of trade reversals, climate variability, environmental degradation, natural disasters, and other exogenous shocks. As a result of the early budget 2017, which was presented in November 2016, we have witnessed an expanded pace of implementation relative to last year. However, weak institutional capacity continues to hinder the ability of the government to provide adequate social services and physical infrastructure, and a reliable regulatory framework to support private sector growth. All of this have combined to give the country a very low rating, 127 out of 188 countries, on the UNDP's Human Development Index, with a score of 0.68, compared with a regional score of 0.75 for Latin America and the Caribbean. Notwithstanding an improved score of 3.4 out of 7 in 2016, compared to 2.8 in 2006, the government is acutely conscious of the country's underperformance in many indices of the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Index, the GCI, related to the quality of our institutions, governance, ease of doing business, and competitiveness. A competitive, diversified, and more inclusive economy is essential to improve trade performance, the expansion and sustaining of job creation, the strengthening of revenue generation. The government's medium-term strategic vision aims to improve institutional capacity and create a prosperous climate for private sector activity. As expressly stated in Budget 2017, the objectives are: 1, to stabilize the economy and the public finances; 2, to design the necessary legislative, regulatory, and policy framework to manage oil and gas revenues and oversee the sector; 3, to encourage and support entrepreneurship; 4, to create more job opportunities; 5, to boost innovation; 6, to reform business facilitation; 7, to build climate-resilient infrastructure. 8, to improve the quality of life. 9, to address poverty. And 10, to reform the public and financial sectors. While the global economic outlook has improved moderately, Guyana cannot rely on external developments to alleviate domestic growth constraints, especially with its elevated status of upper middle income country, with the attendant loss of concessional resources for development. Progress will require more collaborative partnerships across our society. The next phase of growth is about the dynamism and the agility of the private sector and the synergies between the private sector and government. The recent completion of the Green State Development Strategy Framework document, which has been placed online for comment, provides a strong platform for such collaboration and the transition to a faster-growing, more inclusive economy. The broad thematic areas will include alignment of national goals to international commitments, including the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. National consultations will soon spread across the country. These are expected to last well into 2018 to ensure the final strategy has wide participation and buy-in from all groups within our society. Mr. Chairman, while the government is expected to continue to create the enabling conditions for a green economy and lead by example, the GMSA needs to start acquainting itself with the Green Strategy Development Framework and the many opportunities afforded manufacturers. In this vision for a clean, green, sustainable economy in Guyana, the private sector has a responsibility to ensure that this transition takes place by introducing fundamental changes in how they conduct business. Indeed, a new study by the World Economic Forum has identified 16 emerging market forms that are turning eco-consciousness into a source of competitive advantage. These companies turn limitations into opportunities. Limitations such as resources, labor, and infrastructure motivate these companies into thinking creatively out of the box and turning these opportunities into profit. To give you some examples, India's Sri Cement, a company plagued with water shortages, developed the world's most water-efficient method for making cement, in part by using air cooling rather than water cooling. Broad Group, a Chinese maker of air conditioners, taps waste heat from buildings to power its machines. Zhangjido Fishery Group, a Chinese aquaculture company, recycles uneaten fish feed to fertilize crops. Sekem, an Egyptian food producer, set itself the task of reclaiming desert land through organic farming. Similarly, our corporate sector should look beyond the conventional business model and be innovative. Don't wait for the government to lead the way. You, the private sector, are the proverbial engine of growth. You shall now seize the initiative to be the engine of green growth. What is exciting for our country is that as we work together on achieving a green growth pathway, the development of our offshore oil and gas natural resources has begun to feature in our medium-term fiscal path, with first oil expected mid-2020. This certainly is a turning point in our economic history in the development of our country, one that has not been witnessed since King Sugar was introduced in the 16th century. This is a responsibility that the government takes seriously, and in this regard, a number of initiatives either have been taken so far or are in the process of being taken, including A, the design of both a fiscal regime and a fiscal sustainability framework to address the management of natural resources wealth. B, the development of a green paper on the sovereign wealth fund. This will be taken to Cabinet shortly and thereafter introduced to the public for discussion. 3, the preparation of draft sovereign wealth fund legislation by the Commonwealth Secretariat. This draft has benefited from extensive comments by a number of our multilateral and bilateral partners. An interministerial technical team is being formed to oversee the finalization of this draft, which will then go to the Cabinet. After that process is completed, it will be made available to the public for wide consultations before being introduced into Parliament. D, development of local content policy. E, the development of a timeline work plan on what public and private sectors need to do to prepare for forest oil and thereafter. I'm aware that several private sector engagements with Exxon have already yielded expanded business opportunities to many of you. And we anticipate there will be more in the coming months and years. However, let me state categorically that the diversification of our economy, with or without oil and gas, is our #1 priority. We are passionate about this, having witnessed what has happened to many countries with large natural resources wealth, which squander the opportunity to use these resources for economic diversification. The painful consequences of crises and adjustment cycles have been observed whenever oil prices drop sharply or persistently, or when the resources are exhausted, as they do ultimately. We have an opportunity to make Guyana a model country in terms of our responsible use of the oil and gas resources. And to this end, balancing the amount we save for intergenerational security and stabilization on the one hand, and investing in the expansion of the economy on the other, are the core issues that will drive future discussions in this area. So the question is, what combination of actions your sector participants, in partnership with government, will better enable the manufacturing and services industries to be effective drivers of sustainable growth? Mr. Chairman, I submit that contrary to the refrain that successive governments have done little for the manufacturing sector, there is substantial evidence to debunk this. In addition to the wide-ranging concessions granted by previous administrations, there have been several legislative and operational changes in support of the manufacturing industry in Guyana since May 2015. These include, 1, the exemption of duty on the import of machinery for use in the manufacturing process and raw materials were maintained. In addition, the importation of raw material has been done free of excise tax since 2016. Manufacturers are also granted waivers on duty and taxes for items that are not listed on the approved list of raw materials, providing that applications are made to the Council for Trade and Economic Development quoted. And in this regard, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has facilitated several private sector companies over the past 6 months in their approach to quoted. 3, further, in response to the numerous complaints of extended processing time to clear imports, several initiatives were implemented by the GRA that resulted in significant reduction in processing time. We have seen the introduction of the trusted trader status to compliant importers, including manufacturers. This status entails less frequent checks and less documents and physical examinations that are subject to internal controls. Manufacturers no longer have to overstock to reduce the lengthy processing time to clear items, thereby facilitating better inventory and cash management. 5, as mentioned in Budget 2017, the implementation of the single window automated processing system, SWAPS, and the successful installation of Asikudo, for which a contract has already been awarded to acquire the software from the United Nations, will enable information sharing, reduce red tape, and ease doing business in Guyana. 6, another major initiative that was implemented to boost the manufacturing sector was the granting of 1-year tax exemption letters as opposed to the previous system of approval by consignment. Additionally, the manufacturing sector benefited from a reduced corporate tax rate, declining from 30% to to 27.5%. In addition, manufacturers who generate sales of under 15 million are exempted from registering for VAT. And further, the VAT rate was reduced from 16 to 14%. Previously, entities that were mainly zero-rated were required to pay VAT on imports and subsequently make claims for VAT refunds. However, effective February 1st, 2017, legislative changes were made to grant tax exemptions on the import of raw and packaging materials for importers that export 50% or more of their products. Additionally, the financial obligations of companies which are engaging in the manufacturing of exempt supplies were also considered. On this basis, VAT exemptions are granted for the local and overseas purchases of raw materials and packaging materials for companies producing exempt supplies. Another benefit was the increase in the statute of limitation from 3 years to 5 years. Thus, entities have an additional 2 years to claim VAT credit. These initiatives were implemented to reduce the cash burden that was previously faced by manufacturers. Procedures were also put in place to grant compliant companies 1-year tender compliances instead of the previous three months. The GRAs also moved towards a timely payment of VAT refunds to compliant taxpayers. Well, isn't that a mouthful? I hope you're taking advantage of all these measures to retool and expand your industries. Earlier, I referenced manufacturers who exported more than 50% of their production being given concessions. Mr. Chairman, there is much more that the government is doing to encourage manufacturing and exports. 1, we are pursuing an export and investment promotion strategy with support from the Inter-American Development Bank that will see the enhancement of the national quality infrastructure, inclusive of the construction of a modern, state-of-the-art laboratory that will help to assist both traditional and non-traditional exports into overseas markets, which are presently not with us. In other words, then lots of countries don't want to take our export because they don't feel that it meets the standards. So this laboratory is a step in that direction to remove that barrier. 2, strengthening the capacity of the Ministry of Business, including developing an information system for the network of laboratories, improving data gathering capabilities on exporters' needs and quality and standards, and improving information dissemination, awareness, and capacity building. 3, construction of 2 modern state-of-the-art abattoirs in regions 5 and 9, and this will assist in our beef and other animal exports. Undertaking 4, undertaking a study supported by the Caribbean Development Bank to quantify the demand for development finance resources by target groups so as to inform the feasibility of establishing a national development bank. We aim to break the back of the excessive and unnecessary import of a range of food items and other products which were either previously manufactured in Guyana or which can be easily manufactured in Guyana. Mr. Chairman, your government has heard the calls for reducing the cost of capital. And to that end, a suite of reforms is on the way to transform the domestic financial landscape. 1, domestic financial instruments have been identified as the cornerstone of the development of a market for government securities. As such, consideration is being given to deepening the primary market and the establishment of a secondary market. The government invited an export mission to advise on this initiative. The recommendations have been submitted last week, and these are currently being reviewed with a view to early implementation. 2, modern public debt management legislation is being drafted to capture roles and responsibilities of institutions and entities in keeping with international best practices. This legislation will replace the ad hoc and dated pieces of legislation in the area of public financial management. 3, a public-private partnership, P3, policy framework has been drafted, and I have assigned a technical team to review it. The draft framework benefited tremendously from the views of the private sector. As you will recall, that the Ministry of Finance chaired a dialogue with the private sector on that particular area, during which your input was sought for a P3 model with various modalities of delivery. Once finalized, this policy framework will guide the upcoming future P3 engagements, including those envisaged for the new Demerara Harbor Bridge, which will be advertised for by the third quarter of this year, and the Linden-Lethem Road, for whose first phase financing has been secured. The remaining stretch from Mabura Hill to Takitu Bridge will be divided into 2 lots and will be put out to tender by the end of this year. 4, funding has been secured for the implementation of a cashless payment system in Guyana. This will facilitate real-time payment and settlement within and outside of Guyana, will support more efficient trade transactions, and reduce the incidences of robberies. 5, in the GMSA's submission for consideration in Budget 2017, a request was made to review and change the rules of the securities operations so as to encourage listing of companies. I'm pleased to report that we have a first draft of the new securities legislation. Following the consultations and comments from stakeholders, a second draft is expected at the end of July of this year. The new securities legislation will give birth to the collective investment scheme. It will allow a central depository and will address the rules regarding listing of companies. 6, the only credit bureau in Guyana, Credit Info, has reported an upsurge in the use of their facility following the amendments to the law in January 2016. Twice the volume of data has been uploaded to the Credit Bureau database, and 3 times the number of reports have been issued between January 2016 and January 2017. All financial institutions are uploading data to the Credit Bureau, and all microfinance institutions have now signed on. This augurs well for the private sector in the context of risk management and the de-emphasizing of immovable collateral when accessing loans from financial houses. 7, as we expand the range of options for financing both government and private businesses in Guyana, the government will study the benefits of acquiring a credit rating from a reputable rating company. A favorable credit rating can improve the country's image in the international financial markets and lead to low costs of borrowing. Mr. Chairman, the cost and speed of data flow and connectivity is another critical and catalytic infrastructure priority. Having passed the Telecommunications Act in 2016, which paves the way for liberalization of the sector, the government is in an advanced stage of negotiations with GT&T with respect to transitioning to a competitive market for telecommunications services. This is expected to result in lower communications costs as well as facilitate entry into the sector by other private sector investors. At the same time, the government is expanding e-services and e-enabled services and investing in technology to enable efficiency and transparency in the delivery of government services to your firms and to our citizens. A good example of the use of connectivity in our hinterland is the Visit Rupununi Guyana website that is operated from a Lethem office and connects all the businesses that offer tourism services. I'm aware that they are working through the AML CFT requirements to effect an online payment system, which will create more business opportunities for that region. The private sector is not only positioned to benefit from better and more cost-effective services, but also from access to investment opportunities as government looks to partner with private capital to develop certain aspects of the service delivery infrastructure. Mr. Chairman, turn to the cost of energy. Guyana has committed to 100% renewable energy by 2025. Work is ongoing to ensure the expansion of renewable sources of energy from solar and mini, micro, and pico hydro facilities. Further, as a transitional fuel option, the natural gas supply is being explored by the government with Exxon. Liquefied natural gas promises to be an option that can contribute to lowering fuel costs in the medium to long term. Costs are being reviewed to determine feasibility, including the possibility of a micro-liquefied natural gas station and distribution via trick and barge, which may be able to extend the range of consumers to include those residing in hinterland regions. That apart, renewable energy sources remain a top priority. This year, over $200 million has been allocated for a 400-kilowatt solar farm at Mabarumo, which is expected to be operational 4 months after the contract is signed. The Mabarumo community, when it does get it, enjoys a mere 8 hours of electricity per day. However, upon operationalization of the solar farm, residents will benefit from a 24-hour supply using both diesel and solar sources. This type of investment will be replicated in other communities in upcoming budgets. It is worth noting that of the 11 measures in Budget 2017 that are aimed at promoting the green agenda, 9 are related to tax exemptions, tax reductions, and tax holidays. This was deliberate. They were designed to make the financial considerations easier for you in determining how to incorporate green approaches in the execution of your operations. On that, I wish to heartily compliment Demerara Bank and Citizen Bank for going completely solar in the power generation at their Camp Street locations. Kudos also go out to Nanpasad for exemplary work in this respect. Mr. Chairman, while on this subject, I wish to ask your members a few questions. How many of you, apart from those just mentioned, have taken advantage of the tax exemptions to advance your own operations using solar energy? I submit that given the regional tax concessions to hinterland locations and the tax concessions on renewable energy infrastructure, your members will be well advised to seriously consider locating more manufacturing and services industries in those locations. I will be excited to know which of you will be the first to establish an electric docking station or drive the first fully electric car to replace your expensive Hummers, Prados, Fortunas, or other gas-guzzling vehicles. These are just a few of the innovative routes that can be explored. All of our reforms and innovations will be best placed on the foundation of an educated population. Our government recognizes that in spite of the enormous resources that have been invested in the sector, the education sector has failed to provide the quality of labor and entrepreneurship to drive creativity and innovation that are so badly needed across our public and private sectors. This is why His Excellency President David Granger has recently created the Department of Education, Innovation, and Reform. This will include a focus on STEM to ensure greater readiness for sciences and consideration for the inclusion of a chemical engineering program at the UG to support the transformation of resources and ultimately our development. Mr. Chairman, I'm just the finance minister, please. Mr. Chairman, the private sector cannot thrive based only on government. In fact, the most innovative private sector players thrive in spite of government. In our manufacturing and services industry, there is much room for innovation and creativity. We live in a world where customers demand the highest quality, the latest and greenest features in the product being offered, immediate delivery, lowest prices, and the best service. Branding of our products should allow the words "Made in Guyana" make us stand taller with pride, not shrivel in shame. Attention to the consistent achievement of quality and standards, whether we are making fudge or plantain chips or rum, must be the hallmark. If the world recognizes that we can be depended upon to deliver, then the trust and reliance nationally, regionally, and internationally will translate into profits. In a recent presentation to the annual conference of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, one of our leading CEOs, Mr. Komal Samaru, highlighted the innovative approach taken to sell what he described as formerly the cheapest of spirits. He said, quote, "When the company introduced its El Dorado brand on the international market, it decided to go at the very top of the value chain with the launch of a 15-year-old El Dorado rum, recommended as a sipping rum instead of a mixing rum." Don't ask me what it means. But it was a new innovation in the rum category, and it started the new trend of premiumization of a product, end of quote. I want to be able to quote more of these examples of Guyanese producers that aim high, that recognize or create niche products, that utilize to their advantage our geographical indications as we establish and expand sustainable economic ventures. I recognize that the mindset of a manufacturer or certain service providers is certain a more long-term vision than the trader who simply buys and sells. The cash flow turnaround is faster in the case of the latter, and often it seems that there are more traders of imports than makers of exports. The investment and longer turnaround time and testing and retesting that is required in the world of product development may appear daunting to those who wish an easy cash turnaround rather than figure out the right balances of throughput, inventory, and operating expenses over a longer period while creating a unique product. We need more of our private sector practitioners to adopt a longer-term vision in the development of goods and services. Mr. Chairman, before concluding, let me say how heartened I am by the approach being taken to engage the government in a more structured manner. In support of more effective dialogue with the GMSA, I'm willing to take to Cabinet a proposal for three joint roundtables annually on mutually agreed agendas involving a subgroup of key ministers. I'm proposing a sector-focused approach, possibly starting with the forestry sector, as you mentioned earlier, since you have written to me earlier on this issue and the issues affecting the sector. This approach will support greater focus and enable us to measure our partnership to improve sector production, innovation, and your own profits, as well as targeted impact of these roundtables, even as we collectively drill down to sector-specific diagnoses and solutions. In concluding, Mr. Chairman, let me say that your successes are national successes. I therefore look forward to a close working relationship in which the excellence of partnership overwhelms the flight into partisanship. Our conversations must recognize what is good for our nation and not simply for a single producer. Importantly, transparency and good governance must be a two-way conversation and be demanded of each other and met by both sides. The dialogue needs to be more structured, more focused, and more frequent. We have to work to ensure that our engagements are more efficient and productive, which means we come to the table prepared with evidence and not anecdotes. I look forward to our future work together as we dedicate our energies towards moving the manufacturing and services sectors to occupy larger and more sustainable shares of our country's productive capacity. A toast to each of you and those you represent as a collective. You are individually and collectively important drivers in shaping the development trajectory of our country. Let us shape a nation that is diversified and resilient, one that bristles with pride when the words "made in Guyana" are spoken, written, or otherwise mentioned. Thank you very much.
As an investor, we have been in the service industry, in the tourism industry, and I have been very fortunate to look and to listen to people in New York, people in Cuba, looking at Guyana very favorable. And I think your presentation tonight inspired me myself, and I'm sure a lot of businessmen in the room, that tomorrow is going to be a brighter day. And I want to thank you very much. I think more and more as government speak and government action must be not to frighten the private sector. And even if it's a perception, I think the perception needs to be addressed. The private sector needs to be believing tomorrow. The private sector needs to live without fear of our government. We need to be able to work with our government in good faith, like you said, and we are very pleased to hear you talk about the structured approach with the GMA. And so thank you very much, Winston.
But it's enlightening to hear the last part of your speech, where you said that you're going to have roundtable conferences with GMSA to address the issues. And I think that's a good beginning in moving forward with the young leaders that we have today. More so, not just the GMNSA have a young leader, but the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce have a young leader too. And they're both passionate about moving the private sector together. Thank you.
It's a nice suggestion to you, sir, that we improve in that area. Let's stop focusing on the politics, and let's focus on informing the public. I think a lot of what you said, and you're speaking to an audience who follows Guyana very closely. A lot of what you said were unknown to many people here this evening. So we want to thank you also for your intervention and deflecting a lot of Shanopta's questions by saying we're going to meet him 3 times a year. Private sector understand these deflective tactics, but it's a very good solution, it's welcome. And all I can say is thank you, very good presentation. I know.
And we are getting the views that early budgets are not good from one side, and we hear from you that we're going to have an early budget. I understand, and I want everybody to hear that I'm endorsing this, that it's going to be a easy or sweet or a very encouraging budget for business. And that's the word around. I hope so. I know you normally deflect a lot of things, but we're looking forward for something. You got your taxes last year. So this year, give it back.
How about no new
one? You alluded to manufacturing, the growth of manufacturing. And I want to say that we look at manufacturers in this country as being manufacturers that they don't export. They're just doing the basics. But I want to tell you, manufacturers in this country do create import substitution. If you look at the numbers, you'll see, right from our neighbor Trinidad, there's a lot of reduction in what used to come this way. And manufacturers in this country are producing, they're not exporting, but they're producing a lot of imports and fitting up into the local market. In other words, we got to look at the numbers as if you had to import quite a lot. I know that we could do more, but I want to say that import substitution in terms of what used to come here has been reduced. So we got to compliment some of the manufacturers. We've had interactions with the government in terms of meeting with yourself and other ministries. And I want to say publicly, we do not have, the PSC, Private Sector Mission, do not have fight or what we see in the papers. A lot of what you see in the papers, believe it or not, you call it fake news. Okay, Donald. But a lot of what you see in the papers, or read in the papers, I'm sorry, are not what is coming from the private sector commission, or what I check, it's not what's coming from government. I need, sometimes we get together to deflect some of the bad news that we see that is created in the newspapers, and we need to stop and understand that business people do not care who runs government once government performs in the interest of business people. Thank you.
We had Tiger Falls in the Jagan era, up the Demara River. We had Upper Mazruni in the Bornam era. And then we had a half-baked Amelia Falls in the Jamdio era. And at the rate we're going, we're not going to see it in my lifetime or the president's lifetime, at the rate we're going. And we have Amelia Falls, Kumarau Falls, we can go on, Tartuba. All of them are there. We have about 80 sites where we can get cheap electricity from hydro. And Chief, I really don't understand, with the Norway money, with the fact that it's already been environmentally funded, why we are not moving to hydro to bring cheap power so that our manufacturers can get cheap electricity, even in gold mining. At ETK, Kumarau Falls is there, they can serve Aurora. And I don't understand why we're not doing it. When we were at Omai, 55% of our cost is for power generation. Fuel costs, 55%, very expensive. So I would like to strongly recommend, Minister, that we seriously address the issue of hydropower for cheap electricity for the entire country. Thank you very much.
The half-year report will come out in another couple of weeks. But let me give you an indication. Contrary to the belief that we are raking in monies, let me tell you what is the reality. At the end of May, the value-added tax was $1.8 million down relative to 2016. $1.8 billion down relative to 2016. The income tax was down $1.2 billion relative to 2016. We're not raking in any money here. What we're raking in at the moment is arrears. Arrears have been up by $4.8 billion, and that is what $4.3 billion. And that is what has saved us so far, is the collection of arrears for some previously, let us say, not compliant sectors, so to speak. But we're not raking in anything. I mean, I really, and then Sham made the mistake again, as indeed, I think private sector commission had made when they came to me. The value-added tax on electricity, as of the end of May, was not being collected. On water was not being collected. So I cannot understand how business could say the value-added tax on water and so it's killing them. They were not paying a value-added tax as of the end of May. Because the GWI claim they have to bring somebody from Britain to change the computer system that they have in there to accommodate the value-added tax. Give me one show. He said he didn't mention one. But you know, these are the kind of blame, so to speak, that the VAT is being blamed for everything, every single thing. But for me, as I said in the last part, our relationship have to move from anecdotes to evidence-based discussions. Otherwise, you know, we will be in this all the time, you know, and I can't have the private sector going out there and say, oh, the businessmen say the value-added tax is killing them. And I say, where? Show me. But nobody wants to show you how the value-added tax is killing them. But you will continue having a statement that says, value-added tax is killing you. You want an education? You better don't go along the road. I will show you some stats. You see, we pick up these, what we used to call fire rage. Fire rage. But evidence, you know, evidence. The people who want a tax to remove, you first have to show, prior to the tax, this was what you were making, this was what you were doing, and so on. And then even when you put the tax in, you have to prove that it's this tax and not anything else. But you don't get those. I'm willing to, if you tell me after your sales drop X%, that is this tax to it. We can deal with that and we can change it as the time makes it relevant. But I can't go on everybody coming and say, oh, this tax is killing me, oh, that tax. Nobody wants to pay tax, but everybody wants a service. You know, we cannot provide services without taxes. At the same time, I will be the first to admit as an economist, we have to look at taxes and what role they play either in the development of us or the discouragement of the private and other sectors. So that is discussions I believe we can have in the round table. On the hydro, I believe that there have been so much discussion on the hydro that it's not worth saying again. There's no way I can sit here and tell you that we're not looking at hydro. But sometimes, me and Sham, we were talking tonight about the romanticism that we have engaged in as Guyanese people. We are romantic about labor force, we're always talking about Pitchlow, romantic about sugar, oh, sugar brought us here, and so on and so on. We have to stop the romanticism. Norway has only given us $80 million. Probably just good enough for a small hydro. They haven't given you $1 billion to build Amalia Falls. So when you say you have the Norway money, I don't know what we mean by that. You know? And Norway is making it so difficult to access the 80 million. I don't know why. We would love to engage Amalians and all the different other falls, but even when you read the report that was done by North Consult, it wasn't a report that says, ready, steady, go. There was a report with a lot of ifs, buts, if this happened, then this happened. And then of course, Norway will not, even if we went to the old EPC that was there, the Chinese one, Norway will not have anything to do with it. Their money will not be spent if that, because they have their issues with it. So it's not an easy story. It's not as if people are out there waiting to give you $1 billion to go and build Amalia Falls. It doesn't happen like that. You know? So there's no romanticism about it. We would love to have as many hydro facilities in this country as we can. But it's going to always fall on capacity, technology, and most important, financing. You don't go finding $1 billion with that level of ease that we think can happen. And multilateral banks and these aren't financing these hydropowers and so on, these big dams and so on anymore. Many of them have gone out of business with this one. So for me, we need to have more practicality. If you said to me, listen, you see some of the money coming from oil, I want you all, in the context of the diversification, look at a falls. Partner with somebody and use some of those research to look at the falls. Now we're talking something. But don't say, well, you have all these waterfalls and you're not doing anything about them. We'd love to do something.